May we bow our heads today. Lord, our hearts applaud at the sound of freedom, and our hearts cry at the continuance of slavery. Help us, O God, in this place. We know that whenever you call men and women, boys and girls, to be preachers of your word, you take the risk of putting treasure in trash, treasure in earthen, frail, flaky, sometimes failing vessels. But you do it that the excellency of the power might be of thee and not of us. So hide us behind the cross. Cover us in your blood. Come, Holy Spirit, come and surprise us again by allowing lips of clay and ears of clay to proclaim, to hear, and to do your word. In Jesus' name, amen. It is so good to be back home. And if I start thanking Dr. Thomas and Mr. President, all of the people, Sister Walker, Brother Dr. Bozak, all who have helped me get here, we'll be in service till tomorrow. My father walked the halls of CTS in the 1950s and 60s, and Butler University as well. President, General Minister Watkins is often down south, so let me do it like we would do it down south to make sure everybody is covered. What up, y'all? In addition to that text from Matthew 15, I want to lift for you the text Ezekiel 36, verse 26. Moreover, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will be careful to do so. This morning, Dr. James, I want to try to have a conversation with you about a plea we need to ask of God, and that is, revive our heart again. Now, you can't understand Ezekiel 36 or Matthew 15 without understanding the context, why the prophet would call for corrective action regarding the heart, and why even in the New Testament, Jesus was still critiquing the heart. And Jesus could not be fooled by outward forms of religiosity. Ezekiel, in order to understand Ezekiel 36, you may want to go back to Ezekiel 22. When the heart problem that Israel faced was described as only the prophet can, like this: your princes, your political leaders, says the Message Bible, are like rabies-infested wolves. They are devouring the poor, the women, and the children of my people. Is there anyone who will stand up and say anything? Come on now. That's the context. Ezekiel 36 talks about God saying to the mountains that after my wrath and fury for what you have done, I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh, a pliable heart, a heart that will be open to the depositing of my word and my way. Jesus in the New Testament was critiquing the Pharisees who had developed an unholy alliance with Caesar They were preachers that loved to get a key to the city rather than change the city. And so Jesus says, they say, Lord, Lord, with their mouths. And by the way, the ones he was talking to had been to seminary. They were Pharisees, well versed in the rudiments of study. But he said, you say to me with your mouth, Lord, Lord, but your heart is far from me. You know, when we look around today, we think about the Bible, we think about our world. Justice has always been a heart issue, a heart issue. My friends, today in February, we have to remember that Frederick Douglass was born in February. He came up from and out of slavery. He came from a runaway and escaped slave to one of the greatest orators and freedom fighters and righteous troubler of America this world has ever known. He became a voice for freedom. The one who once could not read or write became not only a reader and writer of English, but of several languages. And Frederick Douglass said some words that his words and his deeds helped reshape and reconstruct and renew the heart and the soul of American democracy, even over against violence and hatred and unconstitutional court rulings like the Dred Scott decision. He had to fight pro-slavery forces that had wrapped themselves in an unholy cloth of mis-exegeting the word of God to justify slavery. They were well financed and they were backed by an ungodly, politically well-organized forces of injustice. And in the face of that, some 161 years ago, Frederick Douglass said, let me give you a word of the philosophy of reform. The whole history of progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting and agitating and all-absorbing, and for the time being, putting all other tumults to silence. It must do this or it does nothing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without the plowing of the ground. This struggle may be a moral one or maybe a physical one. It may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. And then Frederick Douglass had the nerve to call certain forms of Christianity hypocrisy. He said, I'm not calling the Christianity that loves Jesus and proclaims Jesus and believes in justice hypocrisy, but that slave-bearing form of Christianity. He literally said, I hate it because it is like those who say we love God with our lips, but our hearts are far from him. And Frederick Douglass used this kind of commitment in his heart along with white abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, who wrote on his cell when he was arrested in Boston, not in Mississippi, not in Alabama. He was arrested in Boston for being an abolitionist, and he was arrested. And he wrote on his cell, I, William Lloyd Garrison, was arrested this day and placed in this cell for preaching the abominable doctrine that all men are created equal. And he had to be arrested because America had a heart problem. Parker Palmer, a contemporary writer, has written a book on the heart of our democracy. You ought to grab it. And within his pages, he lifts up some words by Tempest. He lifts up some words where it says, the human heart is the first home of democracy. It is where we embrace our questions. Can we be equitable? Can we be generous? Can we listen with our whole beings, not just our minds, and offer our attention rather than our opinions? Or do we have enough resolve in our hearts to act courageously, relentlessly, without giving up, ever trusting our fellow citizen to join with us in a determined pursuit of a living democracy? He then says in that same book, we the people called American democracy into being. Today, the future of our democracy is threatened. How can we the people call American politics back to health, back to a healthy heart at a time when, in the words of Bill Moyers, we have once again fallen under the spell of money, faction, and fear? The heart, he says, is where we integrate what we know in our minds with what we know in our bones. The place where our knowledge can become more fully human, for knowledge is not enough without a clear humanity. Heart, comes from that Latin word core. So in its original meaning, it points to the core of the human self, the center place where all of our ways of knowing converge. The heart is where we integrate that which we know in our minds with what we know in our bones. But remember, core also is the Latin root word for the word courage. So when all that we know of self and the world comes together into center place of the heart, then by faith we are more likely to find the courage to act humanly on what we know. What is it that the cowardly lion wanted in the face of the witches of the West and the terrors of the woods and the trouble in the land of Oz? Courage. He wanted something in his heart. The holy book that I read from, y'all do read that around here, right? This thing with 2 testaments. It declares that where your heart is, it's where your treasure is. I carry a copy most of the time with me of the Poverty and Justice Bible with me almost everywhere I go, because I'm so confused by these people that claim to be conservative and religious right when they're so wrong. I'm confused at how you can call yourself a conservative when a conservative means to hold on to the essence of. And if there are 2,000 scriptures in the Bible that speak to love and justice and women and children and how you treat the least of these, and there are only 3 that talk about homosexuality, 2 of them you misinterpret, and none of them trump this one: you must love your neighbor as yourself. How are you a conservative? So I'm actually arguing, Dr. Thomas, that we stop using the language of the empire and we stop using the misinterpretation. I am a conservative. I am a biblicist. I'm a theological conservative because I want to conserve justice and love and mercy, which are at the essence. For the Bible says these are the weightier matters. I'm an evangelical. We need to, as Dr. William Turner says, there comes a place that you must have a Pentecost and rescue the words that have been misused by the empire. 2,000 passages. And when you read them at the very heart of faith, scriptures that are honored by Christians, Muslims, and Jews, at the heart of our faith is love and justice. There it is. There it is, right there in the beginning of this book. Deuteronomy 15:7. If there is any among you in need, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your neighbor. Oh, there it is. Right there in the middle of the book. Psalm 82:3-4. Defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless, maintain the rights of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Oh, there it is. First sermon that tells us the heart of Jesus. The sermon that judges all of your sermons. Because if these things are not in your sermon, you're not preaching like Jesus. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, healing to the brokenhearted, recovery of sight to the blind, liberty to them that are bruised, and to declare the acceptable year of the Lord. You can get up and talk about jump 3 times and you're going to get your blessing. That ain't Jesus. You can talk about, I want to praise him, but if your praising doesn't have prophetic action in it, that's not Jesus. Oh, wait, hold, there it is. Before we even get to the end of the book, 1 John 3:16 and 18, if anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? It's in the heart of the book. That's why Dr. King once declared that he would not have challenged America the way he did and stood up and defied Jim Crow in the heart of Dixie, but for the fact that America put its hand on the Bible and swore certain things. And Dr. King in essence said, I'm going to make sure, number one, you know what you remember what you wrote. And if you don't know what's in the Bible, you put your hand on it. I'm going to make sure that you do. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That's the heart that all men are created equal. December 10th, 1967, Dr. King said, because he knew America's heart was sick, I'm worried about America. He preached a sermon Dr. Thomas called The Meaning of Hope, but he began with prophetic despair. Because there really is no such thing as Christian prophetic hope that doesn't deal honestly with the despair. Anything less than that is just a form of crackism, an addiction that has worked its way into the church and calls itself praise. You cannot have Christian hope that does not honestly deal with the despair. And so Dr. King, in 5 months before he was killed, December 1964, after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, after the passage of the 65 Voting Rights Act, presidents and preachers were telling him, you've done enough. You might as well just cool out and go get you some lecture series. But Dr. King said, I'm still worried about America. I'm worried about a country founded on the principle equal by God that's still wrestling with whether the color of the skin determines the content of the character. I'm worried about a nation sick with militarism. I'm worried about a nation where at that time, the gross national product was $800 billion and we still had 50 million poor people within its borders 100 years after slavery. He said something is wrong with our heart. There are 2 Americas. One is beautiful for its situation. People have the milk of prosperity, the honey of equality, but the other one is ugly and transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. And in Advent season, after dealing with the despair, he titled the sermon, The Meaning of Hope, and he announced the Poor People's March to work on the heart. And right now, throughout this nation, I want to suggest we still ought to be worried. Because what we're seeing is exposing a deep malady of the heart. From Indianapolis, Indiana to Enfield, North Carolina. We don't have a left problem or right problem. That language is too puny. It doesn't even fit this century. That comes from the 17th century French Revolution. We don't have a conservative problem or a liberal problem. We've got an extreme heart problem. When money and greed and political hubris and ego and beating up your opponent become more important than working to uplift the whole of humanity, we've got a heart problem. That's right. When one candidate can get up and call people stupid and dumb and be celebrated by the media, can get all the free media he wants, and if a certain president named Obama had called his opponent stupid, he would have been run out of town. We got a heart problem. When we find ourselves in a time when resegregation of our public schools and high poverty schools are growing at a faster rate than they were in 1971, And here we are 62 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. When we see a nation where we're cutting educational funding, refusing to fully fund it, attacking teachers, hurting and devouring the dreams of our children, like Ezekiel said, like rabies-infested wolves with our policies, we got a heart problem. Amen. When we see more and more policymakers that want to give tax cuts to the wealthy that they don't need, and then raise taxes on the working poor, and then refuse to pay people a living wage, just a living wage. When we know that 54% of the persons that do not make a living wage are African American, 64 million people, black and white and Latino. Then we also want to deny collective bargaining, but then we want to bail out banks with free money but charge college students interest for loans. We got a heart problem. When MIT professor Otto Schwammer said there's a blind spot in American economic theory today, it's called consciousness. When you get an economic professor at MIT talking about consciousness and morality, at MIT, when Otto Schwammer sounds like a prophet, at MIT, we have a heart problem. When we can hardly get politicians to say the word poor, most of the time they talk about those who are trying to make their way into the middle class. Even President Obama, for the first few years, we love him, but we don't agree with everything, use that same language. And you want to holler at the screen and say, no, Mr. President, no, Speaker Ryan, some people are not trying to make their way into the middle class. Some people are just trying to save what Jesus rode into Jerusalem on, and it rhymes with class. Right now, this morning, we are the richest nation on earth ever. Yeah. The richest nation. And we have more poor people than at any other moment in our country's history. Our poverty numbers, and especially our child poverty numbers, over 14 million children poor, over 150 years after slavery. And we could fix it by just taking 2% of the federal budget and using it to programs that work, and we do not have the capacity to do that. That's not a left problem or a right problem. That's a hard problem. All right, that's it. All right, that's it. When we know right now from Joseph Sturchley's book, you ought to read it, called The Cost or the Price of Inequality, that the 400 wealthiest Americans take home an hourly wage of $97,000 an hour, while we are arresting people in the street fighting for 15. That's a hard. And when we know that a new study at Columbia University a few years back said that low levels of education, poor social support, and other social factors contribute to about as many deaths in the United States as heart attacks, strokes, and lung cancer, that 250,000 people die every year, not because God called them home, but because of poverty. We got a heart problem. We got a heart problem, right? When there are 24 states that refuse to even expand Medicaid. Forget the rest of the Affordable Care Act. They said, we're not even going to help working poor people. Now remember, these are people who get free health care because they got elected by the people, but they don't want the people to have the same access to health care that they have. Governors get free health care that are blocking free health care. It's a heart problem. Has to be a heart problem. Huh? And then they suggest, the way they say entitlements, it sounds like the old word, well, I can't say that in here. But they racialize, Tim Wise said they racialize words like entitlement. Okay? That's right. When in fact, in the 24 states that are denying Medicaid expansion, there are 8 million people, the majority of them are white, but 6 out of 10 of the black people live in those areas, but the majority of them are white. We would have had billions of jobs, like right here in North Carolina. I remember when we were up in arms when they wanted to stand against the LGBT community in Indiana. We were threatening to move everything, CTS and everything, and we should have. But the fact is, when you deny Medicaid expansion, people are dying. Let me translate the words to you. 8 million Americans are being denied Medicaid. These are working people. These are veterans. These are people who go to work. These are people with mental issues. They are dying. Harvard says for every 500,000 people you deny Medicaid expansion, 3,000 die. That means we have had over 40,000 people per year die since 2013 in states like Indiana and North Carolina. Die. Not because God called them home, but because a governor wouldn't sign Medicaid expansion. And I'm suggesting we ought to be threatening to pull out over some of this stuff. In fact, I'm working on a group of pastors now that are gonna do this. And if we have the courage, we need to stop lying at some of our funerals. People come in and die, and we say, God, call them home. Let's have a praise party. No, sometimes we need to do like Emmett Till's mama, Mamie Till, and have an open casket party. And we need to invite the media in, and we need to point to them and say, this is what happens when your government has no heart. I'm tired of itching where I'm not scratching, laughing when ain't nothing funny, and praising when I ought to be protesting. Hard problem. When the faith of Islam is being castigated again and again for political reasons. And the same thing that was once said about black men, they're brutes and animals, are said about Islam. And violence is ever elevated. It's a heart problem. When politicians allow 12,000 kids in Flint, Michigan to have lead poisoning, 12,000. And it would have only cost $100. I was reading a study this morning. It would have only cost, let me see, I want to make sure I got a footnote in case the media is here. It would have cost $100 a day to put the necessary anti-corrosives. But you, first of all, you take the power of the people by putting in a manager that wasn't voted on. And then the manager's main job is to cut money. And the cutting of the money does not come from the greedy, but from the needy who are already hurting. And now you think 3,000 people dying on 9/11 was terrorism. It was. But 12,000 children being poisoned with lead poison, which will stifle their brain development, and we may not know the seriousness of it for 12 years, is a form of terrorism that all of us ought to tremble at. But wait a minute. But now here's the other hard problem. 11 cities have a higher rate of lead poisoning than Flint.
All right, now say it.
And the danger of America is when she gets caught, she'll try to clean up there, but not own the systemic problem that exists everywhere. And that's a hard problem. When we live in a country that sings about God's grace being shed on us, but then we don't want to have grace on immigrants. When every presidential candidate that's running is an immigrant except Ben Carson. 2 of them are Latino, and I love Ben. God knows I love him. He operated on my doctor. My baby, saved her life from hydrocephalus. But as a pastor, sometime I'm wondering now, where he living? Where he come from, bro? How you grow up in the projects and you don't like people in the projects? Now, that's a hard problem. When one scholar can say in his book, Punishment and Inequality in America, that prison is the dominant and most formative institution in the lives of poor black men. When the NAACP can produce a report that finds we are born suspect, at risk for shootings, at risk for plea bargaining, at risk for arrests, when Michelle Alexander can call it the new Jim Crow and be accurate, when James Cone can call the prison industrial complex the lynching tree, and he's accurate, when African Americans constitute 1 million of the 2.3 million incarcerated population, we have 1 million more people in prison than China, and China has 1 billion more people than us. When we see black men and women, boys and girls unarmed, beaten on camera, and even the camera doesn't deter them from being beaten or shot. When we see teenage girls in bikinis handled like slave masters used to handle young girls when they went down in the middle of the night to do whatever they did. And when we see executions on the spot, 12-year-old in 2 seconds, black men running away shot 8 times, man choked to death, TV news stations right there, and then this station called Fox suggests that our cry for justice is just a cry against police. We've got a hard problem. When 50 years after Selma, we have less protections of the Voting Rights Act today than we had 50 years ago, August 7, 1965. And we see an all-out attack of James Crow Esquire, who simply has put on a suit and gone into state legislatures.
Come on.
When there is more commitment to protect and expand the ability to own a gun, even on a college campus, than there is to ensure the right to vote. We got a heart problem. When in South Carolina, a governor can come before us and say, I pulled the flag down because 9 people died in Mother Emanuel. And some people applaud, even black people. Oh, the flag, wait, oh, do you realize what she just said to you? She just said only black death matters. She just said to you, in your face. She said, listen, I wouldn't have done this. Only reason I'm doing this is because the 9 folk died and it's gonna mess up our tourism. And I got to get this issue moved. Because for 20 years, the NAACP, we were alive and in living color asking you to move it and you didn't move it. So you're gonna suggest to me that it took 9 lives to be killed by somebody on the same historical date that Nat Turner and other folk were arrested in the same church. And then he flees from Charleston and goes to Shelby, North Carolina, and they find him near the street that's named after the guy that wrote the book and did the movie Birth of a Nation. And you haven't called him a terrorist yet. So 9 black lives being shot in a church is not terrorism.
All right now.
Watch what and I'm going to stand up before you and tell you I'm going to take the flag down because now, and we're supposed to applaud? When Reverend Pickney, who my frat brother who was killed, and other people who were killed in that, they were fighting for living wage, but you're not going to pass that in their memory. They were fighting for Medicaid expansion, but you're not going to pass Medicaid expansion. They were fighting for labor rights, you're not going to pass. Reverend Pickney was late to the meeting that night because he was in the legislature trying to fight for more money from education. You're not going to raise education. In fact, you're going to do something worse than that. You're going to pull the flag down to cover up all the other stuff you won't raise up. And then you're going to give the flag full military honors. And then you're going to come to the funeral. And then even most of the preachers are not going to call you out like Dr. King did when those 4 girls were died. You remember his sermon? Dr. King said, you want to know who killed these 4 girls? Every white person that has participated in racism. You want to know who killed these 4 girls? Every black person that has sat on the sideline and refused to be engaged. Dr. King called them out, and we have a funeral for Pickney, and we get in a praise party talking about hallelujah like he died a natural death. That's a hard problem. And when we act like killing of black bodies is normal and necessary and needed. And so, my friend, I'm worried about America. Like Ezekiel, I'm worried about Israel. Like Jesus, I'm worried about the religiousness. We got a heart problem, which is why we must have a moral movement in this country, once again led by people of faith with heart and courage and commitment. We must begin to recover public theology. We must have a moral movement, a revival, if you will, for the sake of love and justice. We need a heart fixing and a soul regulating in our body politic. We need a revival movement in this nation. We need a prophetic revival that says, waiting on in our hearts, we still believe in justice. We still believe in right. We still believe in the possibility and the progress of this nation. We need a movement that says something is wrong when people are telling us the way to a great America or a great nation is to attack public education and attack health care and attack environmental justice and attack the LGBTQ community and attack women and attack the poor and attack the sick and attack Muslims. And then after you've done all of that attacking, make sure it's easier to get a gun than it is to vote. And once you've done all of that and made everybody mad, just keep pushing it further and further. No, we need a revival that says, and not just a political revival, but a moral revival. I was telling Frank, Brother Thomas, when I came in here, an offer that I got recently. I won't tell you about it, but it was a major offer to come on side of the line of certain political forces and join up. And I said, can't do it. They said, why? Do you understand what we're offering? I said, yeah, you're offering co-option. Because whether you're Democrat or you're Republican, you don't love the prophets, you love the tombs of the prophet. But somebody has got to remain clear that we got a hard problem and believe that our children can be educated, our sick can be healed, our violence can be stopped, the poor can be lifted, right can be actualized, justice can be mobilized, meanness can be neutralized. We've got to have a movement. We need a movement, a prophetic movement right now that refuses to accept going backwards. Somebody believe, do you believe that we can have a heart fixing and a soul regulation? If I did not take off my title, I'd take off my stole, I'd throw away my preaching cloak, I'd quit CTS right now if I didn't believe that we could have a revival of the heart. The heart can be revived. Let me tell you, my wife's a nurse, and she tells me sometimes that in the medical field, that when the heart stops, it's called myocardial infraction or sudden cardiac arrest. She said it's dangerous to mess with the heart because if you stop the heart, if the heart malfunctions, everything else goes haywire. The whole body gets sick. She said, but if somebody is on the scene and has a defibrillator, it's possible to revive the heart, to restore the pulse of the heart. But they've got to have some courage. They got to be able to work on folks, Cheryl, when it looks like they're still dying. They got to work on them when their eyes are rolling back in the head. And they got to shock them, and if it doesn't work, they got to say clear and shock one more time. Somebody has got to call code. And rather than run from the heart attack, run to the heart attack. And then you got to have a code team where everybody comes together. And when code blue is called, everybody gets together and focuses their attention. When the code is called, somebody brings that defibrillator, because if the heart stops, there's a team that never loses hope. I'm suggesting we need a movement in every state in this nation with people of faith who understand that our role then and our role now is to be the moral defibrillators of our time. Regardless of race, regardless of creed, regardless of class, regardless of sexual orientation, somebody needs to call a code. We need everybody. We are the moral, the social, and the political defibrillators of our time. It's our job to shock the state and the nation with the electricity of love and justice and mercy until the heart is revived. We need to march and shock this nation. We need to protest and shock this nation. We need to litigate in the courts and shock this nation. We need to pray and shock this nation. We need to legislate in the halls of power and shock this nation. We need to register people to vote and shock this nation. We need to preach in the pulpit and in the public square and shock this nation. We need to go to jail if necessary and shock this nation. I'm closing. But I feel a pulse in here. Yeah, God. Dr. James Forbes used to be at Riverside, and I are cooking up a little something. We've been asking the question. He's kind of like a Moses, I'm kind of like a Joshua. What if we had this moral event all over the nation, Sharon? And what if we called it the revival, time for a moral revolution of values? And what if we went into each state, let's say Indiana, let's say Mississippi, let's say Alabama, and we came in first and trained 150 clergy in public theology? How not just to be pastors, but to be prophets and priests to the nation. Yeah. And what if we got 150 young people and trained them too? And what if we got 150 praise warriors and got them to singing songs about freedom and justice? Because you know a movement got to have some music. You know what I'm talking about. And what if we then had monthly revivals in each state? And what if we got 1,000 or 2,000 folk in the room? And what if we put a face on the pain? And the exhorters of the revival, those that testify, were the people being hurt by all of the pain. They testified. Then we had some exhorters like Frank Thompson's come in, and then like Sharon Watkins to come in. Then we had preachers. Then we had an altar call. But the altar call was signing a moral declaration of hope, if you will. And we sent it to every candidate running for the Senate and running for governor and running for president. And then at the altar call, we all commit that 1 month in the fall, every state where we have a revival, we're going to take it to the state house. And Brother Bozak, like y'all did in South Africa, we're going to get in our attire. We're not going down there in shirts and sneakers. We're going in full vestment. Lord have mercy. And we're going with the people that need to be brought into the process. And we're walking in the capital of the state, in Indiana and Mississippi and Alabama and North Carolina. And we're going to sit down and have communion. We're going to invite all the media in. And we ain't going to move even if they arrest us. Can you imagine what would happen on CNN if they say something's happening in about 20 states around America? All these preachers have left the pulpit, and they're leading poor people and children and the hurting and those that don't have a living wage, and they've gone in the capitals in all of these states, and they're sitting and they're singing and they're praying and they're protesting and they're saying they ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. And what if we don't worry about what the Tea Party is drinking? And what if we don't worry about what Charles and David Koch money can do? What if we understand that they might have money, but we got a mighty God? And what if we did it for a whole month? We could shock this nation. We could change the narrative in this nation. And instead of Franklin Graham being on CNN, Sharon Watkins is on CNN talking about real justice and real mercy. My God, we can still have a new heart. We can shock this nation. I know we can. If my people are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray, turn from their wicked ways, seek my face, then will I heal the nation. We can shock this nation. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. We can shock this nation. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. We can shock this nation. One can chase 1,000 and two can put 10,000 to flight. We can shock this nation. I don't believe it's too late. Somebody still has a heart for justice. When I was in the club, we asked it like this, but since I'm in the church, I'm going to bring it in here. Is there a heart? Is there a heart? Is there a heart in the house? Is there a heart? Is there a heart? Is there a heart in the house tonight? Is there a heart? Boop. I feel a pulse. Boop. I feel a pulse. Everywhere we go, we ought to sing, revive us again. Fill each heart with thy love. Yeah. Hallelujah. Down the glory. Hallelujah. Down the glory. Hallelujah. Down the glory. Revive. Revive. Revive us again.